Okay, so here our discussion is on plasma membrane, and our objectives for this topic are: number one, to know the structure of the plasma membrane, to identify the different parts of the plasma membrane. Number two, to be able to discuss the different functions of the plasma membrane, and as well as the importance of this cell structure. Okay, so let's start with the discussion. Okay, so when we talk about the plasma membrane, okay, your plasma membrane is also known as the cell membrane. Okay, it is also known as the cell membrane, which forms as the barrier between the cytoplasm inside of the cell and the environment outside of the cell. No? So the cytoplasm is bound with a membrane. Okay, the cytoplasm is bound with a membrane that covers it and separates it from the outside environment. So your plasma membrane have different parts, no? Or shall we say different na mga structures that could be found in your plasma membrane, or ano yung mga component or composition niya. So it has a phospholipid, no? Meron siyang phospholipid. Meron siyang presence of glycolipids, okay? Glycolipids, presence of membrane or transmembrane protein. It could be either peripheral or integral proteins. And then we have also cholesterol. And then we have as well, okay, and the cholesterol, no? Or the fatty acids that is present connected to that of the phospholipid, okay, in the phospholipid part of the plasma membrane. So those are the composition, no? Itong nakikita natin sa picture na ito yung composition ng ating plasma membrane. And by this structure, kaya nasasabi natin na ang ating plasma membrane is a selectively permeable membrane. Dahil sa mga structure na yan, lalong-lalo na yung presence ng ating phospholipids, at the same time, the cholesterol or fatty acid composition of the plasma membrane. Okay, to continue, your plasma membrane, these are the functions of your plasma membrane under the second slide. So your plasma membrane protects and supports the cell and also controls everything that enters and leaves the cell. It allows only certain substances to pass through, okay, while keeping others in and out. And the ability to allow only certain molecules in or out of the cell is referred to as selective permeability or semi-permeability. Kaya nga, again, as what I have mentioned, our cell has a selectively permeable membrane. Okay. Okay, so let's proceed to the different structures of your plasma membrane. So, okay, but before going to that one, talking about selectively permeable, okay, pag sinabi nating word, if we have the word permeable, ibig sabihin ng term na permeable, lahat ng substances, lahat ng molecules could pass through in and outside of the cell. Pag sinabi naman nating impermeable, ibig sabihin the substances cannot pass through the membrane. Pag sinabing selectively permeable, there are some substance that could pass through, some other substance cannot pass through the membrane. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng word na permeable, impermeable, tsaka semi-permeable. So now let's talk about the phospholipid bilayer of the plasma membrane. Bakit siya bilayer? Kasi dalawa siya, no? If we can see it, no? Dalawa siya. Okay, try tayong mag-note. Okay. So, given, no, phospholipid bilayer. Kasi dalawang layer siya. Bakit siya ganyan ang orientation? Bakit ganyan yung orientation ng plasma membrane natin? Bakit nasa loob ang cholesterol or yung fatty acid na chain, bakit nasa labas, no, nasa loob at sa labas on both pole yung polar head, or yung phospholipid, no? Yung phospholipid, bakit nandito siya sa side na ito? Bakit nandito rin siya sa side na ito? Okay. But before that, okay, go back muna tayo sa description. Okay. Your plasma membrane is composed mainly of phospholipids, which consist of fatty acids and alcohol, no? The phospholipid in the plasma membrane are arranged in two layers called the phospholipid bilayer. Take note that the heads are your hydrophilic. Pag sinabi nating hydrophilic, that is water heating or water loving?
Water
Students.
loving.
Loving,
Okay.
sir.
Water loving. Pag sinabing hydrophobic, water hating, no? Water hating, pag hydrophobic, or in other way, they are lipophilic because they are fat loving and they are water hating. So that is the characteristics of your fatty acid and the hydrophilic head of the phosphorus, no? So with that, yan yung composition ng ating phospholipid bilayer. Bakit ganyan yung orientation niya? Remember that inside the cell, one of the main component of the cell inside the cell is water. Okay? Water. And that is polar. Okay? And then also in the outside environment of our cell or in the body, no, outside the cell of our body, ang environment din doon or mostly ang composition doon is water-soluble substances, particularly water din. Kaya what happened is that likes dissolves like, polar to polar, non-polar to non-polar, no? Water loving to water, okay, water heating to water heating. So, kaya yung orientation niya naging ganyan, no? There are some that faces the hydrophilic is towards the outside environment because the outside environment is water soluble, it's water loving, its composition is more on water. And then also in the inside environment, as you can see here, di ba nakita niyo to? Water, dalawang water, water outside and water inside the cell. Do you get me? Kasi nga again, hydrophilic yung head, yung phosphorus. So they orient themselves towards water soluble environment. And those hydrophobic, your fatty acids, orient themselves inside. No? It is just similar when you try to place drops of oil, or shall we say naghuhugas ka ng pinggan na masyadong ma-oily. 'Di ba? What happened? Yung oil will try to bind together, 'di ba? Yung sebo, they try to bind together. No? They will not combine because it is sama sa kantang Langit Ka, Lupa Ako. Kasi langis at tubig will never be combined unless there is a surfactant, no? Unless there is a surfactant that could bind them. Okay? So kaya ganyan yung orientation niya. ng cell natin. Okay? So, since water yung environment in and outside of the cell, the hydrophilic heads orient themselves in both sides. And those fatty acid will orient themselves inside. So, yan yung explanation on this one. Do you get it? Can I have a reaction from the
Yes po,
class?
sir.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Yes,
you
sir.
can you can tap the reaction button, the okay button, no, to say if you have understand, no. Pag mag-ask ako na, have you understand? Pwede kayong mag-tap doon. Okay. Let's continue. Okay. Then each phospholipid molecule has a head, which is a water-loving head, and it has two tail, which is a hydrophobic or lipid-loving tails. And the water-hating tails are on the interior of the membrane, whereas the water-loving heads point outwards towards either the cytoplasm or towards the outside environment of the cell. So, it was explained earlier, kung bakit ganun yung orientation nila. Okay, to continue. Okay. Molecules that are hydrophobic can easily pass through the plasma membrane. Kasi nga, yung interior part ng plasma membrane natin is lipid in nature. No? Lipid siya or fatty in nature. Kaya yung ating mga hydrophobic or lipophilic substances, okay? Hydrophobic, lipophilic substances could easily pass through the membrane if they are small enough because they are water hating like the interior of the membrane, no? And molecules that are hydrophilic, on the other hand, cannot pass through the membrane easily, at least not without help, because they are water-loving like the exterior of the membrane and are therefore excluded from the interior of the membrane. So with that, again, mas madaling makapass through yung mga lipid-loving na mga substances. Parang similar din yan siya pag sa mga gamot na iniinom ng mga pasyente natin. If the characteristic of the drug, no, yung gamot na iniinom nila is lipid-loving or hydrophobic yung characteristic, mas madali siyang naa-absorb, no? Mas madali siyang naa-absorb sa body. Unlike those water-loving. But of course, water-loving molecules or substances could pass through with the help as well of other structure of the plasma membrane, no? Nakakapasok naman sila, but they cannot pass through directly, no? But rather they could pass through mga protein channels na to, no? Yung mga integral tsaka peripheral proteins. So doon pwede silang makapasok. And by means of the process of active transport, no? Through active transport. Okay. So as a summary under phospholipid bilayer, the plasma membrane forms a barrier between the cytoplasm and the environment outside. The plasma membrane has a selectively permeability as its function and is composed of phospholipids arranged in bilayer with the hydrophobic tail interiorly or inside and hydrophilic heads outside, either outside of the cell environment, or it is pointing towards the cytoplasm, no? Pointing towards the cytoplasm, outward towards the cytoplasm. So that is for your phospholipid bilayers. Okay. Next. Next part of the plasma membranes are the membrane proteins, no? In terms of our membrane proteins, okay, the plasma membrane contains types of proteins. A membrane protein is a protein molecule that is attached to or associated with the membrane of a cell or an organelle. Membrane proteins can be put into two groups based on how the protein is associated with the membrane. So it could be either a peripheral protein and a integral protein. So when we talk about simply describe an integral membrane protein is located within the plasma membrane. Yun yung pinaka main na description of a integral protein. Integral proteins are located within the membrane. As you can see in this illustration that we have in the right side, no? Itong gray shaded part are your membrane bilipid. And then nakikita nyo itong ating integral proteins. They are within, no? Nasa loob siya ng ating bilipid phospholipid bilayer. So kaya tinawag siyang integral. Okay? May ang atin namang peripheral, from the term peripheral means away from the center. Now, yun yung definition of the word peripheral. At the end, or shall we say, away from the center. So just like this, in the location of your proteins, yung mga kulay green na yan, that is your proteins, no? So they are located away from the center, or they are not located within, no? They are not located within the bilipid membrane. Okay? Do you get me, students, the difference between integral and peripheral proteins?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So to continue, in terms of integral proteins, we have different types of integral proteins. We have alpha helix, helical bundles, and barrel, beta barrel. So as you can see, they differ in terms of their formation within the plasma membrane. Wherein, ang functions ng ating alpha helix is for as you can see here, your alpha helix, yung pinakauna, meron siyang part na extended outside, no, outside the cell membrane, in the sense that the purpose of your alpha helix is as a receptor wherein molecules could bind. Again, under this, no, under alpha helical, again, nakikita niyo yung red portion na naka-extend dyan sa labas. Ibig sabihin niyan, maaring daan, it could be a receptor, no, with configured shape na kung saan pwedeng mag-bind yung isang molecule, chemical or molecules, no? And with that, it acts as a receptor, and then somehow it allows the cell to recognize that particular molecule, no? So that is the purpose of a alpha helix integral protein. The second one is your helical bundle. Okay, ganyan yung kanyang positioning, ganyan yung kanyang structure, in the middle one under integral proteins. So helical bundle acts as enzymes. They can be an enzyme. Okay, they can be transporters. Okay, which allows transport of molecules from outside to inside of the cell, or vice versa. Or it could be a receptor where a molecule could bind. So that is for helical bundle. The next is we have the beta barrel. So they act as transporters as well. They act as channel proteins. So it allows transport again of molecules in and outside of the cell. So yan, that is your barrel, no, beta barrel, as an example of an integral protein. On the other hand, we have your peripheral proteins, which are away from the center, away or not within, or it is not within the plasma membrane or within the bilipid, no, layer, acts as enzymes, may act as an anchorage, no, which will allows the cell to attach to surfaces. And also it acts as a transporter or carrier in order for a molecule to pass through the bilipid membrane. Okay, bilipid layer, the membrane. So those are the examples of your integral proteins, no? and your peripheral protein. So please make sure to know or to remember the structure or itsura ng mga proteins na iyan under integral and peripheral proteins. Okay. Let's continue. Okay, talking about integral protein. So again, as what I have said, they are within the plasma membrane. They are permanently embedded within the plasma membrane. Yan din yung pinagkaiba. Yun din yung pinagkaiba ni integral protein kang peripheral protein. Your peripheral protein are very strong. They are strongly attached to the membrane that your integral protein cannot be detached or hindi siya nadidetach or nahihiwalay sa plasma membrane. Unlike your peripheral proteins, no? In case of some environmental changes, no? Environmental changes and so on na ma-expose yung cell natin, yung ating peripheral proteins has the capacity to detach, no? Has this capacity to be detached in the plasma membrane, ang ating peripheral protein. So, again, your integral protein exposed to aqueous environment in both sides of the membrane. And the function of our integral protein is for channeling or transporting molecules across the membrane. And it also acts as cell receptors wherein molecules could bind into and will be recognized. And once na makabind yung molecules na yun sa receptor, there might be changes or there might be some effect, no, na maaaring mangyari. Okay, so that is your integral protein, no? And then we have your peripheral proteins, those that are not only temporarily associated, okay, these proteins are only temporarily associated with the membrane. They can be removed, no? As what I have mentioned, maaari siyang ma-detach or matanggal, which allows them to be involved in cell signaling. So peripheral membrane proteins are often associated with ion channels and transmembrane receptors. And most peripheral membrane proteins are hydrophilic. So meaning, si integral protein natin is hydrophobic. Okay? Si integral protein, since ang nature niya sa structure ng plasma membrane is within the plasma membrane, then therefore, your what do you call this? Your integral protein is hydrophobic in nature, no, or lipophilic in nature. Your peripheral membrane protein is hydrophilic, water-loving in nature. Kasi based on their structure, they are outside or not within the plasma membrane. So that is for your plasma membrane protein. Okay? Do you get it, people? Do we understand?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let's continue. Okay. Then in order to further describe, no, and at the same time parang we will through this model, it allows us to really comprehend and imagine what do the cell structure would look like, no? Especially the cell membrane through the model that was proposed by S.J. Singer and G.L. Nicholson, which is the fluid mosaic model. And this is the current, no? It is the current model that even up to date is used when we are describing the movement, the function, and action of that of our cell membrane. The model proposes that integral membrane proteins are embedded in the phospholipid bilayer proteins. Okay? Extends all the way through the bilayer and some only partially across it. And these membrane proteins acts as transport proteins and receptor proteins. Again, that pertains to your integral proteins, integral membrane proteins. Okay. So your fluid mosaic model also proposed that the membrane behaves like a fluid. So yan yung movement ng isang cell membrane, no? Parang fluid. Kasi if we try to look into the illustration that we have here, no? Maaring itong ating fluid, ang itong ating membrane would move in this side and then the other one in this side. Do you get me? So parang, okay, fluid. Do you get me, people? So parang ganun yung movement niya, no? Ng cell natin. It will move just like a fluid. Okay. So with that, rather than a solid. So meaning nito, it is mobile. Hindi siya nagstay lang in one place, no? It is mobile. So with that, okay, the proteins and lipids of the membrane move around the membrane, much like buoys in water. No, para siyang balloon in water ba? No? So ang proteins daw ito namang mga transport proteins natin is parang nagaganon-ganon ba, no? Aside from moving kuan, then parang creating a wave, no? Buoyance or buoys. So such movement causes a constant change in the mosaic pattern of the plasma membrane. So that is the fluid mosaic model is all about. Okay. And then we have, aside from the, okay, since we're talking about the parts of the plasma membrane, aside from the phospholipid bilayer natin, phospholipid bilayer, integral and peripheral proteins, we have also some extensions of the plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane may have extensions such as for motility purposes, no? For motility or movement purposes, we have your flagella and as well we have your cilia. Always remember lang that they differ especially in the length or yes, the length of the flagella is greater than cilia. Okay, so in single-celled organism, the membrane extension may help the organism to move, no? In multicellular naman na organisms, the extensions have their functions, other functions such as cilia on human lungs, which whips foreign particles and mucus towards the nose and mouth. So remember, di ba, characteristic of the tissue that we have in our lungs, in your human anatomy, di ba, it is ciliated, stratified ciliated epithelial cells, no? Stratified epithelium or ciliated, no? Ciliated epithelium na tissues. So that comprises the parang external, ano to ba, sa tong sa linings rather, sa linings sa to ang mouth and nose, no? Ciliated siya. So with that, that is the purpose of your cilia as well, no? So cilia are slender protuberances that project from the much longer cell body. So in terms of cilia, marami yan sila, no, nakapalibot sa isang cell. While on the other hand, a flagella, a lash-like appendages that protrudes from the cell body, okay? From the cell body. It could be maraming klase ng flagellated organism or ano, 'di ba you have that in your microbio, no? In terms of flagella, the Atricus, Lupotricus, Amphitricus. Do you still remember that? Do you still remember that in your micro?
Hindi pa po na-discuss yun.
Pa ka na-discuss sa inyo? Saan pa pala kayo sa micro ninyo? History pa kayo?
Mga infectious pa lang.
Saan? Mga,
Infectious diseases.
wala kayo nagdig na? Hindi kayo nagdig sa bacterial cell? Structure of the cell?
Hindi po. Hindi po.
Diretso na diseases? Anyways, yun. No? So, meron types tawag pag depende sa number of flagella present in a cell. No? Pag wala, it's atricus. Ibig sabihin yan, wala siyang atricus. Isang flagella. Peritricus, marami in one cell. Maraming flagella in one cell. Meron ding in one end, maraming flagella. Like itong isang flagella na ito, marami siya in one end. Meron din tawag sa ganyang klaseng flagella. Okay. To continue. So, they are projections, no? Again, yung ating cilia tsaka yung flagella natin are projections and extensions of the plasma membrane connected in the plasma membrane. Okay. So there are 6 different types of cellular movement across the cell membrane. And what are those cellular movements? Okay, let's proceed to this topic. Okay. Okay. Hindi ko na siya i-view yung video kasi I expected that you all have viewed the video. Okay, types of movement across cell membrane. So again, the cell membrane is one of the great multitaskers of biology. It provides structure of the cell, protects from cystosolic contents from the environment, and allows cells to act as specialized units. Okay. So, anong ibig sabihin itong protect cystosolic content from the environment? Ibig sabihin yan, it protects the cell membrane protects the content of the cell from leaking. Okay? It protects the cell content from leaking or leakage, leaking outside. So, yun yung isang function ng ating cell membrane. Okay. So the membrane's lipid bilayer structure provides first level control. No, tight packed together, phospholipid were tightly packed together, and the membrane has a hydrophobic inferior, which causes it to be selectively permeable or there will be selective permeability. And in case of cell membrane, only relatively small nonpolar materials can move through the lipid bilayer. Remember, the lipid tails of the membrane are nonpolar. The hydrophilic head are polar. The hydrophobic tail are nonpolar. Okay. However, water-soluble materials like glucose, amino acids, and electrolytes need some assistance to cross the membrane because they are repelled by the hydrophobic tail of the plasma membrane of the phospholipid bilayer. All substances that moves through the membrane do so by one of the 2 general methods, and which are categorized based on whether or not energy is required. Of course, we have your diffusion, your passive transport, and then we have also your active transport, which needs energy. Okay, so what I am mentioning now is, again, passive transport versus active transport. So active transport, in order for a substance or a molecule to pass through in and out of the cell, it needs ATP, or ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And if that happens, no, pag ang ATP mo bind to the receptor in that channel, ito nakikita nyo na number 1, mahihiwalay, no, in order to consume the energy, mahihiwalay ang isang phosphate bond doon sa ATP. Ang nangyayari from ATP, so ang nangyayari niyan is that, okay, since, di ba, it needs ATP, they bind to a particular receptor in the channel in order for the substance to move inside. Di ba? Naintindihan niyo yung drawing ko? ATP. As it binds to that channel or particular site wherein ATP could bind in the receptor, particularly it could be an integral protein, no? What happened is that your ATP will break down one phosphate, so it will become ADP plus an inorganic phosphate. And then of course, synthesis of ATP will happen again para mag-bind, undergoing phosphorylation process para mag-bind yung phosphate group to ADP, forming another ATP. Okay? Nakuha ang process. I guess you guys. So, mabi-break down yung ATP once it is consumed. Okay. So, yun. So, in contrast with passive transport naman, is the movement of substance across the membrane without the expenditure of ATP. It's just that the configuration, okay, it's just that the configuration of the molecule, no, the shape of the molecule configures with that of the tawag natin ito, channel or receptor wherein it could pass through. No? Nag-configure siya ba? Same shape, parang lock and key theory. So with that, the molecule could pass through easily, no, into the membrane via channels. Okay, via the channels. Then of course we have diffusion, no? Talking about the term diffusion, that is the movement of a substance or a molecule from a higher concentration towards an area of lower concentration, wherein that is against concentration gradient. And then we have also facilitated diffusion, okay? Wherein under facilitated diffusion naman, kailangan yung molecule na yon will bind to a particular molecule so that it can configure to a particular channel. Like a molecule will bind to glycolipids, no, para makapasok siya sa loob ng ating cell. So that is facilitated diffusion. Anyways, there are further discussion of that one in this and then succeeding slides. Okay, talking about passive transport again, in order to understand how substances move passively across a cell membrane, it is necessary to understand concentration gradients. So na-mention ko na earlier yung term na concentration gradient. Concentration gradient is the difference in concentration of the substance across a space. Molecules will spread or diffuse from where they are more concentrated to where they are less concentrated. So the movement of molecules from higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Yun lang naman yung ibig sabihin niyan of that of a concentration gradient against concentration gradient. Okay. So, under passive transport, included doon si diffusion. Okay? Included doon si diffusion. So, passive transport is the movement of molecules. Sorry guys. Okay, passive transport is the movement of molecules across the cell membrane and does not require energy. It is dependent on the permeability as well of the cell membrane. And there are three main kinds of passive transport. And as what I have said, diffusion is part of it. Again, diffusion of molecules, no? And then also we have osmosis. Pag sinabi nating osmosis, it differs from diffusion in the sense that osmosis pertains to the movement of what? Anong movement pag sinabing osmosis?
Water, sir.
Okay, movement of water molecules in and outside of the cell. And then lastly, we have your facilitated diffusion. Under diffusion, the movement of molecules in the region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration of solutes. Okay? So solute transport is from the left to the right. So movement of the solute is due to the concentration gradient. So one good example of diffusion would be diffusion of a dye. Have you able to perform that in your senior high laboratory? In a diffusion of dye in a gel, no?
No.
Or in the laboratory for microbio, diffusion is done through diffusion of dyes through the agar, no? Kasi, di ba, for example, if this is your plate, you make a hole here. You place solution of dye, and somehow this area here is, for example, agar siya. No? So we'll check if how the dye will diffuse towards the gel or agar, no? Diffusion. Kasi higher yung concentration dito ng dye. Pagdating dito sa area ng gel natin, it has lower concentration. Kaya movement of from higher to lower. Okay. Next is water, no? Okay, next proceed to water na on. Osmosis. Okay. Or before that, okay, another discussion pa. Simple diffusion across the cell plasma membrane. The structure of the lipid bilayer allows small and charged substances such as oxygen. So what are those molecules that are capable of the process of diffusion? Again, the answers are oxygen molecule, carbon dioxide molecule, hydrophobic molecules such as lipids to pass through the cell membrane down their concentration gradient by simple diffusion. Okay. Okay. In this presentation, we can see how a particular molecule pass through or diffuses towards the cell, towards inside of the cell over time. Okay? Over time, as time goes by, no? Imagine, ganun katagal, no? Hindi siya basta-bastang nakakapasok. Okay. Then we have your facilitated diffusion. Okay. Under this process does not require ATP but does require cell membrane proteins, okay, which are called carrier proteins to carry the molecules across the cell membrane from an area, okay, from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So example of this is ito siya. Itong yung ating mga integral membrane protein, as long that as the molecule of that particular chemical or molecule configures with that of the shape of the channel, no? Shape of the channel, then it would be more easier for it to be facilitated to move inside of the cell. As you can see here, itong pangatlo, itong pinaka-right part, no? So itong pinaka-right part na ito. As you can see, the configuration of the shape na circle yung molecule, then circle din yung configuration niya. So mas madali siyang nakakapasok inside the cell, no? So that is facilitated diffusion by the help of membrane proteins, mapa-integral man or peripheral. But mostly integral. Okay, mostly integral proteins. Facilitated diffusion of a substance crossing the cell or plasma membrane takes place with the help of proteins such as channel proteins and carrier proteins. or protein channels, no? Protein channels and carrier proteins. Channel proteins are less selective, okay? Channel proteins are less selective than carrier proteins. They usually mildly discriminate between their cargo based on size and charge, okay? So usually, protein channel proteins or protein channels, usually ang pumapasok diyan are your ions, no? Mga ions ninyo, no? Could easily pass through protein channels, ion channels, protein ion channels. Yun. And again, there are some which is called as carrier proteins. So ibig sabihin ng carrier proteins, again, less selective. So maraming nakakadaan sa carrier proteins. So those are under your facilitated diffusion. Okay. The next one is osmosis, no? The next one is osmosis. Again, diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane, wherein the process by which molecules of a solvent tends to pass through a semi-permeable membrane from a less concentrated solution into more concentrated one. Okay. Thus, equalizing the concentration on each side of the membrane. Movement of water from higher to lower concentration. Yun lang yung easiest way of describing it. Hanggang sa maging equal ang environment of water in and outside of the cell. So just like this one in the illustration, we have your sucrose, we have your sucrose, the concentrated or sugar concentrated solution, tsaka your diluted sugar concentration. So therefore, mas higher ang concentration ng solute, which is sugar, than water in this side. And then mas lesser ang solute. Okay, lesser ang solute. Lesser ang solute in the right side with higher amount of water. So with that, water will move from right to left. Okay, water will move from right to left in order to normalize, no, the concentration of water in both sides. Kaya nga, 'di ba meron akong assignment sa inyo last time? Ano nga yung assignment ko?
Yung non-membranous organelles and membranous organelles. Saka yung application sa medical field ng hypertonic solutions and hypotonic solutions, as well as lactotonic solutions.
Okay. Sige, I would like to ask someone from the class to give their answer on that one later, no? So since I think it is related to this topic then. Okay. So that is for your osmosis, no? Nag-move yung water towards an area of lower concentration of water. So again, ang deal ni osmosis is movement lang ng water, not by the solute. Okay. Of course, under osmosis, no, in application to that of the animal cell, including our cell, no, exposing our cell with an environment which is isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic. So for isotonic, it should be 0.9%, no? 0.9%, particularly of that of sodium chloride environment. Wherein kaya yung ating plain NSS when give other na mga isotonic solutions when given IV, no? It does not causes pain, no? It does not causes pain pag in-inject ngayong solution. Unlike if it is hypotonic or hypotonic, there will be pain response, no? Towards sa vein, no? pag hypotonic at saka hypertonic ang nangyayari, ang solution. Kasi it tends to damage, no? It tends to damage the, for example, since it's IV, it tends to damage the RBC, no? The RBC. So with that, for isotonic, equals concentration of water in and outside of the cell. For hypotonic, therefore, pag sinabing hypotonic, meaning it's mas mababa ang concentration ng solute, mataas ang water concentration outside of the cell. So that's why what happened is that water moves inside, no? Inside of the cell or in the blood cell, causing it to burst, no? Causing it to burst. And then on the other hand naman, if exposed sa hypertonic solution wherein decreased concentration of water outside with increased concentration of solute, then therefore water will move from inside of the cell, moving outside, causing it to shrink or crenate, no? Causing it to shrink or crenate and then lysis, no? Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na term na plasmolysis. Okay? That is under hypertonic. Okay. So talking about isotonic, so two solutions that have the same concentration of solutes are said to be isotonics or equal tension. Okay. Iso means same. No? Again, iso means same. When cells under extracellular environment are isotonic, the concentration of water molecules is the same outside and inside of the cell, and the cells maintain their normal shape and function, such as what you have seen in the illustration. Okay, next. Hypertonic. Okay. Talking about hypertonic solution, having a higher solute concentration, as what I have mentioned paulit-ulit, no? Than inside the cell. No? Higher concentration of solute outside than inside of the cell, causing it to have lower concentration, lower concentration of water outside kasi mas marami ang solute. So this causes the water to rush out, okay, to rush out, making the cell wrinkle or shrivel, no? Wrinkle or shrivel, and this is clearly seen in red blood cells undergoing the process of crenation or shrinkage, no? Shrinkage or crenation. So as you can see here, the cell have shrink in the sense that water moves outside of the cell. Do you get it? Gets ba ang hypertonic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So let's proceed to the next slide. Hypotonic. So on the other hand naman, pag hypotonic, again, the environment of the cell, no, the environment where the cell have been exposed to is mas higher ang concentration ng water outside than inside of the cell. So again, yung water will move inside the cell, causing it to burst, not causing it to burst or to become big. So hypotonic solution has a lower solute concentration than inside of the cell. The prefix hypo or under or below. The difference in concentration between the compartments causes water to enter the cell. Cells in a hypotonic solution will take on too much water and it swells. Now, it swells with the risk of eventually bursting. So swelling, bursting, no? The cell, just like in the illustration, the cells inflate and eventually it bursts. No? Water is transported into the cell. Okay, solute concentration inside the cell is higher. Okay, so that is hypotonic, no, solution. Okay. Cells under microscope. So when we study cells, okay, exposed to the different solutions, ito yung nagiging itsura niya sa loob ng cell natin. If we try to check it in the microscope, yan yung nagiging itsura ng mga bursted cell, bursted cell or swelling na cells, no? Of a cell exposed in hypotonic, and then shrinkage of cells and lysis of the cell exposed in an hypertonic solution, and no change or no net movement happened under isotonic. Again, no net movement happened in isotonic solutions. Tapusin lang natin tong part ng topic na to. Okay, next is okay. So now let's proceed to active transport. So since we're done with discussing passive transport, discussing diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and your osmosis. So we have also active transport, which requires cells energy in the form of ATP or adenosine triphosphate. So under this, so if a substance must move into the cell against its concentration gradient, that is, if the concentration of the substance inside of the cell is much greater than the concentration of the extracellular fluid, the cell must use energy to move the substance. So ibig sabihin niyan, again, the concentration of substance ba is higher inside of the cell, and then outside of the cell, no? Kokonti lang yung concentration ng substance na yon. In order for that cell outside to move inside under active transport against its concentration gradient, no? Against its concentration gradient, kailangan niya ng ATP para makapag-pass through. So, some examples of active transport mechanisms, okay, are those of small molecular weight materials such as ions, no? Such as ions through the membrane, no? Active transport of ions in the membrane. Okay. It creates a charge gradient in the cell membrane. For example, in the mitochondrion, hydrogen ion pump hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space of the organelle as part of making adenosine triphosphate. Kasi in terms of production of ATP, kailangan ng hydrogen ion, no? Kailangan kasi under anong process nga iyon? Kailangan siya ang tawag kasi meron tayong enzyme that usually make ATP, no? Known as ATP synthase, no? ATP synthase or ATPase, no? Wherein, kailangan niya ng hydrogen ion. I think it's tatlo. I think it needs tatlong hydrogen ion or hydrogen molecule in order to make one ATP. In order to bind ADP plus inorganic phosphate to make ATP. It needs hydrogen ion. Do you follow? Do you follow, guys?
Yes, sir.
So yun, requirement siya, no? Under the synthesis of that of your ATP. No, hydrogen ion pump. Kaya included siya dito in the mitochondria, hydrogen ion pumps hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space of the organelle, such as part of the making of the ATP by the ATP synthase enzyme, no? Kailangan siyang mag-pass through doon para ma-convert si ADP to ATP. Yan. Okay. So that is active transport. So ang kanang is that necessary to have ATP as part of the in order for a solute or molecule to pass through against its concentration gradient. Then we have here endocytosis. The next one is endocytosis. Because we have two types of active transport. We have endocytosis and exocytosis. May I ask, what will you do in your laboratory for this afternoon? Anong gagawin ninyo sa lab?
Group recitation po.
Group recitation. Sabihan ko lang si ma'am na at tapusin lang natin tong discussion natin dito para we'll be done with the topic, no? Para we'll be done with the topic. Paalam muna ako saglit, ha? Anyways, mataas yung time ninyo, no, sa laboratory compared sa lecture. Siguro mga 30 minutes. Extend ako ng 30 minutes. Sabihan ko na lang 3 PM na kayo mag-start, ha. Anong oral recitation ninyo? Ano
Sa
oral
mga
recitation?
po ata.
Regarding po sa ano sir, yung mga pH like equipment,
Okay. Equipments, mga laboratory apparatus. Okay, sige. Let's continue muna, no? Types of active transport. The first one is your endocytosis, no? So this is for large molecules, parts of the cells, and even whole cells into a cell. Okay? So there are different variations of endocytosis, but all share common characteristics. So the plasma membrane of the cell invaginates, okay, to fold in so that the outer becomes the inner surface, forming a pocket around the target particle, and the pocket pinches off, resulting for the particle being contained in a newly created vacuole that is formed from the plasma membrane. So, parang kumbaga, a portion or component of the plasma membrane becomes the covering of that molecule that moves towards inside the cell, and then after that it will be pinched off, no? It will pinch up. So gaya nito. So for example, ito naman endocytosis kasi papasok to endo. So within cytosis of the cell. Okay. So parang component ng cell membrane will somehow, okay, be the cover, component of the covering, no? I-enclose siya, no? Ito yung tinatawag ting invagination, itong U-shape na ito. Pag pumasok yung molecules doon sa loob, no? Nag-i-invaginate siya until such time na mag-reach yung dalawang portion dito ng both ends ng cell membrane, and it will be pinched off. And once na mapi-pinch off ito, once it will be pinched off, then it forms into a vesicle. No, it forms into a vesicle. Okay, going back. So, yun, no? Yun yung ginagawa niya. Yung, again, portion ng cell membrane becomes maging part siya ng vesicle, no? Vesicle that will enclose the molecule, no? That will enclose the molecule that moves in. So, most likely, itong endocytosis, more on sa mga solid particles, no? Solid particles. Okay, so the process in which substances such as proteins gains entry into the cell without passing through the cell membrane. Kasi nagiging covering niya yung cell membrane portion as a vesicle. Okay. And then we have ito pala yun, no? Types of endocytosis, no? If it is large particle, particularly mga solid particles, no? Large particles, solid particles, the process of endocytosis is known as phagocytosis, no? Phagocytosis is the process by which large particles such as cells are taken by a cell. Phagocytosis is the process by which the cell uses its plasma membrane to engulf a large particle, giving rise to an internal compartment called the phagosome. Okay? So the end product there is phagosome, no? Phagosome. Okay. So yan yung nangyayari, no? So once na may engulf siya, no, may engulf siya, it stays inside the cell, nagkakaroon ng spaces, and then at the same time, nandoon yung na-take up na molecule or substance, and that is known as your phagosomes, no? Itong area na ito. So again, it is taking up, no, of the molecule. So example of this one, no? Example of this one is yung mga parasites natin, who had one of its structure in the of your parasite, like your amoeba has pseudopods, no? Pseudopods which allows phagocytosis of the food, no? Allows it to engulf the food, taking it inside, no? Taking it inside, forming vacuoles, no, or spaces inside the cell, and that is known as your phagosome. And then of course, digestive enzymes, and also detoxification, okay, ng mga enzyme allows it to be digested, properly digested inside the cell. Okay, so that is for larger molecules. Again, a type of endocytosis is phagocytosis. Pag sinabi namang pinocytosis, it's a type of endocytosis which small suspended particles in the extracellular fluids are moved into the cell through pores formed on the cell membrane. So the term pinocytosis is formed of two words, which means which is pino and cytosis, where pino means to drink, while cytosis means relating to the cell. So ibig sabihin yan, guys, Pag solid particles, endocytosis, phagocytosis. Pag liquid particles or solute suspended in solute suspended in a liquid, no? Solute or molecules suspended in a liquid to move inside the cell is through the process of pinocytosis. Do you get me? In liquid form, it's pinocytosis. If it is solid form, larger forms of molecules or substances, it's phagocytosis. Do you get me? Nakuha niyo guys? Do you follow? Difference between pino and phagocytosis. Both are types of endocytosis, pero nag-differ sila as to the size of the material or substance to be taken, and also the manner if it is a solid substance or a liquid substance. So yun. So yun yung difference ni pino tsaka ni phagocytosis. Okay, no? So again, solutes or molecules suspended in the liquid, particularly liquid of the extracellular fluid. So it will be, okay, there is invagination, okay, and then again, the membrane becomes part of the covering, no? Or shall we say the membrane of the vesicle, no? Nagiging component siya as it moves inside the cell. Okay, as it moves inside the cell. Okay. So again, ang difference ng dalawa, to be more specific, takes fluid and solute. So liquids, again, for pinocytosis. Larger substances, solid substances, and even cellular substances or cell structures like bacteria, no, through phagocytosis. It is just like that of our phagocytes, wherein, di ba, in our body, our phagocytes is a defense mechanism of the body. Di ba? By means of our, I think it's part under our WBC, no? Na phagocytes na cell, wherein pag na yung mga foreign cells like bacterial cell that invades the body, in response to it, no, our immune response to it is to create more of those phagocytic na cell para engulf siya, no, to engulf siya, and then it will be digested by the enzymes in our body that could detoxify it, that could kill those organisms, no? Just giving an idea of how phagocytosis happened inside the body. Again, through our phagocytes na mga cells, which are defense mechanism against bacterial infection, viral infection, no, and so on. And then we have exocytosis. So talking about exocytosis, of course, that is the opposite of your endocytosis, malamang, no? That is exo, okay, which means exit, no? So a particle enveloped in membrane fuses into the interior of the plasma membrane. This fusion opens the membranous envelope to the exterior of the cell, and the particle is expelled into the extracellular space, of course. So yun yung nangyayari under exocytosis. So exo means exit, cytosis means cell. Exit of the cell, of course, is a process in which a substance is exited from the cell without passing through the cell membrane. So examples of these that might be exited, including the secretion of proteins like enzymes, hormones, and antibodies. Of course, these enzymes and hormones, no, or these proteins na nabubuo, na binubuo ng ating cell, some of it should be released kasi kailangan siya ng ibang parts ng body natin, or kinakailangan din siya ng ibang cell, specialized cell natin. So that would be, okay, that would be released in the, di ba, packed proteins are packed by the Golgi apparatus in the form of vesicle. And that vesicle, the membrane of that vesicle will bind with the membrane of the cell membrane, and then it tries to open, no? It will open and then release the protein molecules such as enzymes, hormones, and antibodies outside of the cell, no? So yan yung mechanism ni exocytosis naman. Okay. Similar pa rin, no? Okay. So kindly review on the video presentations, no? The different video presentations because that could help elaborate the topic, no? So that is the last part, no? Under active transport, we have your endocytosis, no? We have your phagocytosis and pinocytosis, and then we have your exocytosis. Under active transport, we have your diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. And in terms of the structure of the cell membrane, of course, the very important one is your phospholipid layer of your plasma membrane, and which allows more of those lipophilic substances or hydrophobic substances to pass through. And for the others which are not lipophilic, okay, they can pass through the help of the protein receptors, protein channels and carriers that could be either integral protein or those that are under peripheral membrane proteins. Okay. Any questions from the class? Are there any questions? Students, with regards to cell membrane and its function and the activities involved in the cell membrane?
Sir, ako po may question po ako, sir.
Sige, Jam.
Sa hypotonic solution po, kung wari is yung red blood cells is napuno na solution. Pag nag-burst na po siya, and then ano po magiging itsura ng red blood cells? Magiging katulad rin po ba siya ng hypertonic? Like mag-shrivel or...
Maaari siyang mag-lyse din. Once it burst, sometimes it also lies at the same time. So parang sabog siya. So hindi lang siya titigil hanggang burst, especially pag sobra-sobra na yung uptake, 'di ba? Sobra-sobra na yung uptake ng water. It could also lies, causing it na parang mag-weaken din yung cellular structure ng RBC, causing the leakage of the cellular content. Yun siya, Jam, regarding
Okay,
it.
sir.
Okay, other questions? Any other questions? Are there any other questions? How about the others?